Welcome to the Gamers Tavern, episode 27. This episode, legendary game designer Rich Baker joins us for a continuation of our campaign setting series as we talk about Birthright. Considering this is Ross's favorite campaign setting, this is another episode where I don't talk a lot. But there's a lot of great information in this episode about a campaign setting that was just a bit before its time. So grab a drink from the bar and take a seat at the table in the corner, and we'll be right back after this word from our sponsor. DriveThruRPG is the place to go to purchase digital copies of your favorite games. Dungeons & Dragons, Shadowrun, World of Darkness, Savage Worlds, Numenera, Fate, and so many more. Do you long for the feel of actual paper in your hands? Well, they sell physical products too. Just go to gamerstavern.org and click on the link in the show notes to find your favorite games and support the podcast with every purchase.
Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the Gamers Tavern. I'm Ross Watson, your host.
And I'm Darryl Mott Jr.
And tonight we have with us one of my favorite game designers, Rich Baker.
Hi, everybody.
I am like a kid on Christmas right now. One of the best things about being the host of a podcast is you get to invite your gaming heroes onto the show and talk about the games you love the most. And I have got to say, Rich and the work that Rich has done on just all the numerous things that he's been involved in has been a huge inspiration to me in my career, and like all of the games and stuff that I love. I trace a lot of it back to some of the stuff that Rich Baker has done. So having him here on the show, you're going to just hear me goob out quite a bit for the listeners. So just so you know, that's going to happen.
Well, I'm very flattered. I don't know exactly what I did to deserve that, but I'm glad you approve.
Yeah, I was looking over Rich's Wikipedia page, and I'm like, we've had him on the show before, haven't we? And then I'm thinking back, no, I don't think we have. We've talked about him so much and his work that it's just come up so often, it feels like you've been on.
Well, I really, we had an opportunity to, we thought about bringing you on earlier, actually, because we were doing a show on the Forgotten Realms setting.
Okay.
And we had Richard Lee Byers with us for that particular episode.
Yeah, great guy.
And Darryl and I talked about it, and I'm like, well, if I can get Richard Baker for the show, I really want him for Birthright. I mean, not that he doesn't know a lot about Forgotten Realms, because he does know an awful lot about Forgotten Realms. But yeah, I'm selfish that way.
You have no idea how much he has bugged me about recording this episode since I first decided to do the campaign setting series that we're doing. He said, when are we doing Birthright? We're doing Birthright. Is Birthright coming up? So
the first thing we do when we bring on a guest, we ask them to tell us and tell the listeners a little bit about who they are and where they're known for in the gaming industry. And we call this the gaming character sheet. So Rich Baker, if you would, what is your gaming character sheet like?
My career starts all the way back in 1991. Upon getting out of the Navy, I had been on active duty for 3 years. I was sending resumes around to basically everyone looking for what the next step in my career was going to be. And I sent one to TSR for just the pure hell of it, because I'd been a D&D fan from a long ways back, and I thought, hey, it might be kind of cool to take a shot at being a game designer. Well, they liked my resume enough, or at least they found it interesting enough, that they actually brought me out for an interview, and lo and behold, I wound up getting the job. So the very first thing I ever worked on for TSR way back in the day was a Spelljammer product called the Rock of Brawl.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know that one.
Yep. In my pedigree, that is product number one. I stayed with TSR through the 90s, working on products in Dark Sun, a lot of stuff in the conventional, just a straight-up D&D line. For example, the Player's Option books, Player's Option Combat and Tactics, and Player's Option Spells and Magic. Those were a couple of product ideas I had and I pitched and I got a chance to work on. From there, we went on to beginning to work on the alternative science fiction role-playing game, which I co-wrote with Bill Savasek. But along about, late 96, early 97, of course, TSR was coming on hard times. So Wizards of the Coast stepped in and wound up buying TSR. Wizards made a pretty generous offer to bring essentially the whole creative staff for D&D at the time out to Seattle to come to work for Wizards and basically get a chance to keep on doing this great, cool, awesome job we were already having a chance to do. And along with about 50 of my closest friends, we all moved out to the Seattle area en masse and basically formed the D&D team for Wizards of the Coast.
My good friend Ed Stark tells a great story just about that exactly. Of course, he worked with you on the setting we're going to talk about tonight, Birthright. So I've kind of made a hobby out of stalking the Birthright creators and listening to their stories. So yeah,
we had Colin on already. So
and we've had Colin Baker on the show already. Yeah. So Colin McComb. Yeah.
I know what you meant.
No, we haven't had any doctors on yet. So
No doctors.
we're really hoping for David Tennant, though.
But we're the move out to Seattle. It's a very interesting story. If you ever get a chance to talk to Ed Stark, any of the listeners, definitely ask him about it because he's very entertaining when he discusses it.
It was something that obviously I never really expected I was going to stick out here as long as I have. But my wife and I and our kids, it turns out, hey, we love this corner of the country. It really is a gaming mecca, of course, with Wizards being here and so much of the computer gaming businesses being located right in the same area. So it's really just been a good spot to be. Anyway, to continue on my gaming character sheet, we did wind up getting Alternity published and got a chance to do some cool stuff with that, like the Star Drive campaign setting and the Dark Matter campaign setting. Then we got very serious about doing D&D 3rd Edition. So I was part of the initial 3rd Edition team with Monty Cook and Skip Williams, and the three of us spent months and months meeting and talking and discussing everything that needed fixing in D&D 2nd Edition and how to kind of modernize the game engine into something that was a little more of what a contemporary role-playing game would look like at that time, as compared to something that still had its roots in the early 70s. Jonathan Tweed, of course, joined the team pretty shortly thereafter. Peter Atkinson was heavily involved the whole time along. We wound up knocking out 3rd Edition and obviously got a chance to be a part of a very big renaissance in the RPG business at that time. From there, I went on to manage the 3rd Edition Forgotten Realms team. I was a big part of the 3rd Edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting reboot that we did. Did lots of
which is excellent
stuff. So many, too many products to name, I think, and wound up being a part of the 4th Edition design team too, and got a chance to write plenty of 4E stuff. And along the way, I also got a chance to scratch my Navy roots, my wargaming roots, by working on various Axis and Allies titles and the Axis and Allies miniatures game.
And you did the Gamma World reboot as well, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Bruce Cordell and I basically did the reboot of Gamma World based essentially on the 4th Edition game engine. It turned out it was something that it was funny because Bill Slavacek, our director at the time, called Bruce and I in and told us, hey, we're going to do Gamma World and we want, Bill pushed us towards make it goofy. And Bruce Cordell and I both looked at Bill and said, yeah, we understand that a lot of people kind of look back on Gamma World as this crazy, goofy property. But when we were kids, we played it straight up. We thought it was really serious. I mean, yeah, it's a little goofy, but we didn't necessarily play it for laughs, right? We kind of, played it pretty serious. But we, adjusted our attitudes a bit and came back, and I think the 4th Edition Gamma World.
Well, I want to call out just really quick a couple of things you did in 3rd Edition that are on my list of top products, frankly, of all time. The Book of Nine Swords is just utterly brilliant.
Well, thank you.
It has gained a big following on a site called 4chan. I don't know if you're familiar with 4chan or not.
No.
They have a nickname for it.
And they have a nickname for this book.
Sorry, it still makes me laugh.
It's the best nickname. It's called the Book of Weeaboo Fightin' Magic.
The Weeaboo Fighting Magic? Okay.
Yeah, because it's obviously anime inspired and stuff like that. So weeaboo is basically a term for people who are like anime fans, and fightin' magic, the intentional misspelling of it's just beautiful. But they love it, and I loved it. I thought it was just a brilliant way to kind of revitalize the idea of a fighter type character in the 3.5 milieu, if you will.
Sure.
So Book of Nine Swords, just fantastic. Now I do have a quick question about that. Were there things? I mean, there's always been a rumor that was kind of a test bed for a lot of stuff that ended up in 4th Edition.
Yeah, actually, we didn't necessarily set out to do that at first. We'd had the idea rattling around our product brainstorming sessions for years of, hey, we need to make a book that's all about spells for fighters, magic for fighters. What can we do that would, that would scratch that itch? Because we thought that there was a potential out there for something that would be pretty cool for the folks who liked the configurability and the awesome special effects that were associated with wizard spells, but wanted to see that in a more martial character. Eventually, the Tome of Battle, Book of Nine Swords, made its way onto the schedule, and I was assigned to work on it. So I kind of dove in and started tackling the idea of quote spells for fighters, and came up with something that was a pretty workable, complete system with it. But then in doing playtesting and discussion around the department with it, some of the early 4th edition design work was already underway. We had a great discussion with Andy Collins and Rob Hainso and James Wyatt and myself, plus Bill Slavacek and a couple of other folks, where we really kind of looked at these two sort of parallel efforts that were going on at the same time and realized, there's enough of the similar ideas that are being played here with the spells for fighters notion and some of the power-based design that was going on in 4E that, maybe there's an opportunity here to kind of combine these two notions. And first of all, it'll probably make the Tome of Battle a better book. But secondly, it'll also let us test out some of these concepts that we are beginning to really explore very seriously for 4th edition. So, for example, one of the things that we wanted to test very carefully in Tome of Battle was the way that you would regain and recharge your powers. So the 3 different classes that are part of Tome of Battle, each of them has essentially a different recharge mechanic, which is, not to put too fine a point on it, a way to explain how discarded cards get back into your hand. Because a lot of this was influenced very strongly by the guys in the Magic the Gathering team who were trying to kind of help us look at D&D as managing a hand of powers as well as a role-playing game. So that sounds terrible. People always get angry when they think you're kind of mixing up your chocolate and your peanut butter there. But there was really a lot of good ideas and great discussion that came out of that, and that led to a lot of the final implementation of the Book of Nine Swords.
Yeah, I'm the big 4th edition defender on this show. I actually like 4th edition D&D very, very much. So
let's not get into that tonight.
Yeah, that way lies madness.
I'm not saying it's better than any other edition. I'm saying I like it.
Listen, I have sat at the dinner table in between Ed Stark and Bill Slavacek when the subject of Edition Wars came up, and I thought, oh my God, I'm at ground zero. I am literally sitting between the heads of R&D for 3.5 and 4th edition right now. So, yeah.
I think, I don't really put a whole lot of stock in the edition of what we're saying because I think that every edition of D&D has been pretty good at doing what it set out to do. I think 4th edition for all the angst and gnashing of teeth that kind of came around about it, I think it's still, there's some parts of 4th edition that I think are frankly just amazingly great. And I hope you will stay and be brought forward into the next edition of D&D when it comes out.
What we like to say on the Gamers Tavern is that every edition of every game has its strengths and weaknesses. And there is no reason... Sorry, go ahead, Darryl.
I was going to say, we also like to say edition wars are bullshit.
Yeah, because there's really no reason... There's no reason to hate on someone else for liking a game that they like. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
One last thing about 3rd edition before we move on to the next step here is there's this really fantastic venture that I don't think a lot of people know about. It's just a brilliant adventure.
Red Hand of Doom.
The Red Hand of Doom.
Well,
now,
thank you.
Can you briefly, just for the listeners, tell them what Red Hand of Doom is about?
So Red Hand of Doom is a fairly substantial super adventure. I want to say it's 160 pages or so. It's something you would actually be playing for months and months and months. But it arose out of the idea that when I was looking at, okay, it's time to work on the super adventure I've been assigned to work on for this year, and I was thinking, what kind of adventure do I see that's out there that I really want to explore? I felt like it had really been a very long time since D&D had really delved into a very classic trope of fantasy fiction, which is we have to stop a gigantic horde.
It is totally classic. I think that you nailed it. That's the feel you get from reading Red Hand of Doom, is it's like a classic D&D adventure. It hits all those tropes. And it gets into some of the really cool goblinoid races, which are one of my favorite things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
and it was one of those few epic adventures I remember where I was really, really focused on that sort of low to mid tier play. I don't remember anything. Now I know more about the 4th edition redo of Red Handed Doom, but it stuck around that 3rd to 8th level butter zone a lot, and there weren't a lot of really big giant adventures at that scale.
Yeah, and like I said, it was also just simply the attraction of telling the story of something that you see happen over and over and over again in your favorite fantasy novels. Of hey, the army of darkness is storming the kingdom of the good guys. You have to stop it, and that's such a classic beat in fantasy fiction. It's been told, and I mean, all going back all the way to the Lord of the Rings and the Narnia stories, and just over and over and over again. And there just were so few adventures out there that really took this head on and tried to give you a good way to interact with it as player characters, the heroes of the setting. So
it should come as no surprise to listeners. I'm a big fan of Rich Baker's adventures. I have all of his Dungeon Magazine adventures. I like them a lot. Red Hand of Doom is one of my favorites. And when we kickstarted Accursed, I approached Rich and I asked him if we could end up doing some kind of swap with Primeval Thule. So I'm very pleased to say, for the first time on the show, actually, Richard Baker's adventure for Accursed is called The Banshee of Loch Finnair, and by the time the show airs, it will be available on DriveThruRPG for the Savage World setting, my Savage World setting called Accursed.
And I saw the cover art for the thing. Oh my God, it's gorgeous.
The cover art is beautiful, but it does reflect the overall quality of the adventure inside.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I was going to say, I had a lot of fun working on it. Very much like we were just saying with Red Handed Doom, that I sat down and said, okay, what's kind of the iconic court adventure? When I had a chance to really get familiar with the Accursed setting and really kind of looked it over, and I will say, Ross gave me a ton of latitude to kind of say, hey, here's this entire world. Find the thing in here that you most want to, tell a story about. I gave it a good read. I looked through it. I thought about it a little bit, and I decided that the thing that kind of caught my eye was the story of King Galen of, now I'm totally going to garble the name. Help me out. It's,
Cairn Canan.
Cairn Canan, yes. Thank you.
It's because, our fantasy Scotland.
There's a horrible tragedy there of, this guy was persuaded or beguiled into slaughtering his whole family. There's a lot of emotion to work with there. You can do a lot with that. And it just kind of naturally led into the notion of of ghosts and banshees and Scottish castles, and man, that's how can you go wrong?
Yeah, I actually wrote the whole setting for Cairn Canan, and I was going for as Macbeth as possible.
That was what I was going to say. It came off to me when I saw the cover. I was like, dude, this is so Macbeth right now.
Oh yeah. God,
I can't wait to get my hands on it.
So I just wanted to make sure and point that out since we were talking about Rich's and his adventures. Lastly, it's important to point out that I have actually interviewed Rich on my blog, Rogue Warden. And one thing that I found out in that interview that I never got a chance to follow up on, is that you actually enjoy Champions. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, from way back in the day.
Because, the two things that I talk about the most on this podcast are probably Birthright and Champions.
Yeah. Yep. I wish I could find more people to play Champions with. It's just
me too.
Yeah, it's hard to round up a gang of people for it, and I think it's a little bit tough to put together a long running Supers game. You have to kind of maybe sell your gaming group on, hey, let's play Supers for 8 or 10 sessions, and then move back to whatever long running game we want to do. And if you wind up getting 4 sessions out of them, great.
Yeah.
Well, something tells me if you decide to do something online like Skype or Hangouts, Ross will be more than game.
Oh, hell yes. So let's move on to the next step of our podcast. It's called Tavern Tales. And we're just going to ask our guests to give us a story of a memorable die roll.
This is going to sound kind of soulless on my part, but I don't really think of the die roll as governing a game in quite that way. I mean, I can remember, a couple of times where I scored a crit, and I was pretty happy about the fact that I did. This is not terribly urgent, I guess, but this is just kind of amusing at the time. We were playing in 2nd edition D&D the Night Below campaign,
Oh, excellent campaign.
Yeah, really great stuff. I'm amazed, by the way, that they haven't ever gotten around to doing a 3E or a 4E version of that, because it was such a cool setting. But I was playing the wizard of the party, and we just started. I'm a first level character. I've thrown my spell. I've got nothing left, and the party's being mauled by goblins. And I asked the DM, I was like, we're on a road. Is there good sized stone nearby or something? And the DM, John Ratliff, says, sure, there's, you're on a road. There's rocks or whatever. I was, great. I pick up a rock and I throw it at the goblin. And sure enough, I crit the goblin and just killed it outright with a throwing stone because, it's a second edition goblin. It's got like 2 hit points.
Nice.
So yes, the mage, the master of intellect and magic, managed to brain a goblin with a thrown rock, and that just kind of hung with that character that entire campaign. And never threw a rock again in that campaign, right? Because by the time you get second level, you have a couple more spells. Now eventually you never have to do it again. But yes.
That reminds me of a gnome wizard I played in 3rd edition who was far more deadly with his crossbow than he was with any of his spells.
I must say, you don't want to throw another rock after that because you've already set a precedent. And if you never do it again, you can always say, oh yeah, you want me to throw a rock at you?
Yeah.
Didn't think so.
Look at how he's got a rock.
Yeah, really.
Who cares about the fireball, the lightning bolt? He has a rock.
Watch out for those rocks. The next thing is we're going to talk about what we've been playing lately. I'm going to start with Darryl, actually. Darryl, what have you been playing lately?
This is hopefully the last time I will be saying this. I haven't had a lot of time for gaming because I've been doing a lot of work on the site. We brought on board a new editor I talked about a couple episodes ago, Nicholas Jaworski, who is doing an excellent job of taking a lot of this work off me. And hopefully I'll be I'm looking to start playtesting a couple of things and doing some more reviews for the site. So I'll be able to talk more later. But yeah, Shadowrun Game Table, we've been playing that. We had a really, really interesting adventure that you guys will hear probably about a month and a half.
Oh,
where
yes, it was great.
It was a very focused on my character, and Rafe got a lot of really, really good moments in it too. He got to play the big damn hero.
Well, so did you.
I got to play the cool badass you pushed me too far.
At the end of the adventure, it was you who walked out of the corporate headquarters with both of our characters over your shoulder. So,
I lucked out in spoilers. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. It takes my character on a massive left turn. I don't know where things are going to go from here. But it's definitely interesting. There is one thing that's happened this week that I would like Ross to talk about, something about RPG Geek.
Yes, I am, well, by the time you hear this, it will be over, but, currently, for the week of April 1st, and it is not an April Fool's joke, I am the RPG Geek of the Week at RPG Geek.
And we'll have a link in the show notes for look at all the questions people have been asking them.
Yeah, it's been the response there has been wonderful. The RPG Geek community and the Board Game Geek community and all those guys, they're wonderful people, and I'm very honored to have been chosen. So thank you, and definitely go check it out. Well, it'll be someone else by the time you hear this podcast, but go look at it anyway.
I'll have a link to the archive so you can see where the community's been asking him a lot of really, really cool, interesting questions, and he's been going through and answering them. So you'll learn a lot more about Ross through this. And I'm still kind of wondering about that 2 truths and a lie, because I thought all 3 of those were true.
Well, that's the best way to do the 2 truths and a lie, is to make them all seem totally plausible. In my opinion.
Because, yes, Shadows Angelus, and that totally seems like something you would do.
What have you been playing lately, Rich?
We've actually been playing a fair amount of Primeval Thule, as you might expect. That is the campaign setting that I and my partners at the Sasquatch Game Studio are putting together. We kickstarted it last summer, and we've been playing it a lot, pretty much, off and on now for a year or so, as we're testing out different aspects of the setting, and also just playing it to kind of see, how does the energy feel, right? How's it working for us? So one of the things we hadn't done a lot of beforehand is we hadn't played a lot of high-level Thule up to this point. So our current game goal is we're playing high Paragon level 4th edition Thule, because that's one of the little brackets we haven't really been trying out much yet. That's part of the challenge of by the way, doing a setting that you are simultaneously writing in 3 game editions. because Thule's going to be available for Pathfinder in 4th edition D&D and also in the 13th Age rule set.
Yeah, I remember when this Kickstarter was up, I made sure to point that out a lot over on Ain't It Cool News, because that was, no one else is really doing, a lot of people are throwing Savage Worlds and the goal is Pathfinder and maybe 13th Age. No one's doing 4th and Pathfinder and 13th Age, pretty much 3 of the biggest D&D games that are currently available.
So, Rich, what is, if you could just give us the elevator pitch for Primeval Thule. I mean, I know what it's about, but our listeners would sure like to know.
Primeval Thule is basically a savage, barbaric world. It draws upon traditions of sword and sorcery as opposed to high fantasy. So think along the lines of Conan stories more than Lord of the Rings. Inspired by some of the old Conan stories, a lot of Robert E. Howard's old stories were very strongly tied into or influenced by the Cthulhu mythos. Now that I've actually stretched out my elevator pitch to a minute, let me come back around to the real elevator pitch, which is, it's Conan versus Cthulhu.
Nice.
So,
and if I believe you hit the first stretch goal, is that right? And a certain someone might be doing something for it?
That is true. The Accursed Trio are going to provide an adventure for Primeval Thule.
John Dunn is actually hard at work on that right now. So, yeah, we're really excited.
I've had enough of Thule right in front of my face that I haven't, it's like, okay, the Accursed guys are on it. Great, fine. I know they're on it. I'm good. I've got a layout to wrangle. So, but it's been kind of
I do all the layout for Accursed, so I know what you mean.
Just this last week, as I took a look at our monster chapter that we had planned, and I did some thinking about it and realized that we dropped kind of strange Cthulhu mythos creature mentions here and there throughout the book. Things like Migo and moon beasts and Shoggoths and stuff like that. And we hadn't really planned on including those in the monster chapter because we figured that most people kind of knew what they were. And the stats for them are already available for the Pathfinder guys because the Pathfinder bestiaries support those pretty well. But, then we realized, okay, first of all, not every Pathfinder GM is going to have all the bestiaries right in hand. And, for the 4th edition guys and the 13th Age guys, they probably just want to have those stats to begin with. So we juggled our monster chapter around and made a little room to get those classic monsters in. And for the Pathfinder guys, they're actually slightly different versions of them. So instead of just giving you the Migo stats that are in the open game content, we presented the Thulean Migo and explained why it's a little bit different, from the run-of-the-mill Migo you might... Well, that sounds funny when you put it that way. The run-of-the-mill Migo you just might meet out there because they're around.
just walking down the street, there's a Migo, like your average everyday friendly neighborhood Migo. How's it going?
So, I see one at the bus stop every day.
Another thing that I'm playing recently is I am playtesting a board game design of mine, trying it out on my friends and family, and I'm hoping that we might be able to actually show this off at Gen Con and arrange some secret playtests for people who want to sign up and get a chance to get a sneak peek at a board game design that was in the works. And we might be looking to try and kickstart that sometime after Gen Con.
Yeah, you might want to, connect with your friendly neighborhood podcasters and let us get a sneak peek at it, maybe.
Awesome.
And your friendly neighborhood game reviewer for a big media website.
Yes. I'm interested, and I'm curious to see where that goes. Absolutely. As for myself, I've been GMing a Pathfinder game here in Texas with some of my friends, including at least one of my friends who swore he would never play another D20 game ever again. And we're using the most awesome random roll tables that we can find to do everything randomly because that's the way we want to roll. We're using the awesome central casting Heroes of Legend book. We're using the DMG random encounter, random treasure tables. It's crazy fun because we are just literally making up everything as we go, and we're having a good time with that.
By the way, Ross, if you want, I've got a 600 die table for a Wand of Wonder. If you want,
I'm not sure about that. Wands of Wonder and Deck of Many Things are two ways to break your game. So I'm just gonna not say no to that. But yeah, we've had a good time with that. I'm playing in a Champions game, and I kind of wanted to tell Rich about this.
Oh, sweet.
A friend of mine is running, because I begged him, because I could literally find no one in Texas to play Champions with. He is running for me a Skype game where we're playing the descendants of the 1980s Steranko-era Avengers.
Okay.
It's called Avengers Next Generation, and I am playing Valkyrie 2, who is the daughter of the Valkyrie and Fandral the Dashing of the Warriors 3.
Oh, nice.
It is really fun. We have just discovered that Mordred has turned all of New York into a fantasy dimension by stealing the Darkhold from Doctor Strange.
Because he just rolls that way. Yeah.
Because that's how he does things. So it's pretty awesome, having a good time with that. And, of course, doing the game table with Darryl.
Very nice.
Okay, so we're going to jump into the meat of the topic for tonight, because all about tonight is about one of the settings, one of the unfortunately more forgotten settings of the D&D worlds, Birthright.
And I don't know a whole lot about Birthright because it was a little bit before my time, because I got into D&D a lot in 3rd edition. When the first D20 system books came out back in 2000, and Birthright was already kind of fallen by the wayside by then. And it's such a shame it was ahead of its time, because I've done a lot of reading about it since Ross keeps talking a lot about the setting. And it really, really, you guys correct me if I'm wrong here, it has a really big Westeros feel to it in the tone.
I find myself often wondering if it turns out that George Martin was a Birthright fan. Because when I read his stuff, it's like, there's definitely some similarities here. I mean, obviously, even in like a turn of phrase like the Iron Throne, okay, well,
yeah,
sure, that could come from a lot of places, right? But still,
there's a strong story out there, and I put a lot of faith in it just because I believe it's possible. But there's a strong story out there that Ed Stark, the guy who wrote a lot of Birthright, was on a panel with George Martin back in the day, and supposedly the story goes like this, that Martin looked over at Ed and said, "You have a really interesting name, sir." That's how Ed tells the story, and I think it's plausible. So there may be some truth to that whole connection between these two things.
And we know Martin's a gamer, so
absolutely.
So that's one thing I kind of wanted to bring up here. Everything I've read about Birthright, it gives me a very big Westeros, Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire vibe to it, but it really feels like it's its own unique thing at the same time as well. And rather than, try to parse it myself whenever I've got probably two of the biggest experts on the setting around here, can you guys kind of tell us and the listeners who may have been a little bit too young for Birthright when it came out, what exactly is this setting like? What's the thing for Birthright?
Well,
that sets it apart from the other campaign settings.
The basic premise behind Birthright, the elevator pitch, if you will, is simply this is the setting where your character is a king. That back in about 93, 94, when the creative folks at TSR were casting about trying to decide what our next new world we wanted to debut was, we threw there was basically an open call to everyone in the department to pitch your idea about what an interesting world would be. They didn't like any of the worlds that we pitched. But the idea kind of came down from, essentially, believe it or not, from the higher management that, hey, we'd like to see a setting that focused a lot on nobility. It's like, well, okay, sure, I'm a little crushed you didn't like my Sunset Empire's idea, or, John Pickens' Jigsaw World idea, or Jeff Grubb's awesome mountain and sky ship and cloud world idea, but, okay, setting about nobles, sure, let's take that and run with it. So, Colin McComb and I, we're got the job of, hey, here's the very basic premise. This is the campaign where your character gets to be the king. Now take that and run with it. And out of that, of course, developed all the premises associated with Birthright. That the idea that there is literally a divine right of kings, that there is something special about the characters who become the kings in this world. That the kings are also adventurers and heroic characters at the same time that they are the rulers. A lot of the features of the world were derived from a fantasy novel that I had written actually while I was in the Navy, of all things. And
The Falcon and the Wolf.
Yeah, though the original version was called Kingslayer, was my original working title for it. The Falcon and the Wolf that actually was published. Okay, what's the chuckle for?
I'm a big Game of Thrones fan.
Okay, sure, yeah.
I'm seeing the parallels after the fact.
Right, well, it turns out...
I want to make it clear to the listeners, this predates Game of Thrones by about a decade?
By about a decade, yeah.
Yeah. Now, I will say, in defense of Game of Thrones, right, that the novel that I wrote called Kingslayer, I don't think ever saw the light of day. Maybe I might have mentioned the name, like once, like in the foreword of the Birthright setting, but I never published it. You know, it never went anywhere. But it did give me the chassis for at least one of the 5 kingdoms, or 5 nationalities that made up the continent on which Birthright was set. The Anwirian Empire. Essentially was something that came right out of a novel that I had worked on and never sold. The other ones, Colin and I cooked up, with, months of concept meetings and discussions and batting ideas around. And, the premise of the world obviously is your character is a king. Your character is also a hero and adventurer. It's a low magic world. It's a world that has a fairly high, fidelity towards or what the quote real world, version of D&D might look like. So you don't necessarily have, a whole lot of archmages around. You don't have magic being used as technology. It's a kind of gritty, low magic setting that's very heavy in politics and intrigue when you really, if you choose to play up those angles. And the cultures of the setting are relatively realistic. The cultures, obviously, Anwir is kind of probably best thought of as sort of an amalgam of like, medieval France or England. There's a country that looks a lot like Germany of the Hanseatic League. There's another one that's very Moorish or Arabian in feel. There's another one that's very Russian or Slavic in feel. So all these things kind of have very strong groundings in the real world. And I think because of that, a lot of people appreciated just the texture of it, the sense of realism.
I tried to capture that same texture in Accursed when I was building the different cultures and basing them off of real world cultures along the way.
And that was a big tip we had in the world building episode that we did.
Yeah.
Where we talked a lot about draw and file out the serial numbers. So it's
right.
This isn't necessarily medieval England and France, but you see where we're coming from.
Now, one of the, I'm not going to go through the whole Wikipedia page on Birthright, because you can go look it up. If you're really interested, you can get all the details there. But the high points is the first thing you need to know is that the old gods are dead. There was this big war between the old gods and the evil god, and during this conflict, they all died fighting each other. The gods sacrificed themselves to destroy the evil god, and what this did is it rained down divine essence across all the people who were involved in that battle. And it was a huge, huge battle. It was the final confrontation between Sauron and the forces of light, if you will, in a Tolkien, type of approach. So everybody who was at that battle who survived, because there was kind of a cataclysmic, kaboom. Everybody who survived that battle got some of the divine essence into their bodies, and it became what was known as a bloodline, because you could pass it on to your children. Your bloodline, could be stronger or weaker depending on how close you were to the explosion, how far away. And then over time, you could do things that would either strengthen or weaken that bloodline as well. This was the key to the idea of the divine right, because your bloodline was literally connected to the land that you ruled. And I think they were going for a very Arthurian, if the land does well, you do well. So that's the first thing you need to know. The old gods are dead. There are now new gods, but the old gods are all dead, and their essence has kind of been placed into lots and lots and lots of living people on the world. The second thing you need to know is that this empire that Rich was talking about, the Anwirian Empire, they conquered most of the known world. They expanded greatly from their home. They went north and they conquered a place called the Ryuk Highlands. They went west and they conquered the Moorish peoples, which was called the Kanasi. They actually went northeast and conquered the Hanseatic League guys, the Brektor. The only people they didn't actually take over was the Mongolian Russian guys in the place called Vosgard. And even then it was a close run thing. So the empire actually ruled a ton of the known world, but unfortunately that empire came to an end. Was it roughly 500 years before, Rich?
Yeah.
Roughly.
Exactly. And
so
I'll
roughly
tell you
500
about the expansion of the Anwirian Empire, which I don't think I've ever mentioned to anyone. So here's a completely little new tidbit of Birthright lore.
And Ross is now drooling.
I am.
one of the little inspirations for this particular notion of the growth and history and collapse of the Anwurian Empire was actually the Tolkien's History of Gondor.
Oh, yeah.
The basic idea was that Gondor, of course, was founded at the end of the Second Age, and early in the Third Age, Gondor had a great 1,000 years or so, where Gondor expanded to cover this huge area and actually
the Númenóreans
subjugated, most of Middle-earth in a lot of ways before the last king of Gondor died, and Gondor started kind of collapsing back in from its huge expanse. So that was definitely an influence in that whole notion.
Yeah, it was definitely something I was curious about because, like I said, there's a lot of, if you're looking at it as someone who didn't read it before Game of Thrones, there's a lot of Game of Thrones in Birthright, but if you look beyond, okay, strip out my knowledge, read this as someone who's never read Game of Thrones, it's very reminiscent of the pre-Hobbit era Middle-earth in that there's these little kingdoms that are all ruled, but they used to be one kingdom.
Yes, and
it used to be Gondor ruled everything, and not Rohan, and was it the Riverdale, and all the other kingdoms that were Middle Earth.
And that's basically what happened. Is the Empire of Anwur came to an end when the last emperor died, fighting the big bad. We'll talk about him later on, but he went up to fight the big bad, the Gorgon, and died because his divine right to rule was tied into his ability to rule the empire. I believe that this was a really neat way of combining the story with the mechanics, because you could tell, oh shit, this is just not going to work. So combining the story with the mechanics, once he was gone, there was simply no way to keep the empire together, and it fell apart. And now, 500 years later, when you play, in the contemporary setting of Birthright, you are existing in the shattered remnants of that huge empire, which is kind of one of the key driving goals of, not driving goals, one of the driving forces of the political movements and so forth in Birthright is the idea of somehow reestablishing or reunifying at least Anwur itself, and then maybe, as a long-term goal, maybe, reestablishing contact with the other realms as well.
This is certainly where that whole Game of Thrones parallel is really prevalent. Because the people in that particular corner of the world of Anwur, there's about, half a dozen or so very serious contenders who are people who might be strong enough to actually make themselves emperor out of over this whole corner of the continent again. And they are basically enmeshed in a sort of permanent rivalry, where they're always trying to line up different people to back them and try to see if they can build a coalition strong enough to let them finally stamp out their rivals, some of them they've been rivals with for centuries. And, get a chance to essentially restart the imperial dynasty with your house as the head.
And probably the last thing I want to point out is that about Birthright that makes it unique is it has a dark twin called the Shadow World. And the Shadow World is really kind of a reality just beyond the reality that most people understand. It's like the Tales from the Dark Side. This is
I know something. Halflings are from there.
Yes, they are. They fled the Shadow World because the essence of that evil god from back in the day, that's where he went. He went to their homeland, which was this alternate dimension, and he turned it into a place of horror and evil and undead creatures stalking the land. Which is great because it's literally just beyond your perceptions.
And it used to be one world, but then at some point in time it got split into these two separate parallel worlds that still kind of interact with each other. Right?
Yeah.
Or am I
wrong? Sort of, kind of. I mean,
yeah, sort of, kind of.
Sorry, I'm excited to actually know something about Birthright.
One of the little
that this will never happen again in the rest of the episode. So
one of the little Easter eggs or concepts is the idea that they're called halflings not because they're half the size of a human, because they exist half in this world, half in the other.
Yeah.
Nice.
The Shadow World is a really interesting and unique and mysterious place. It's kind of one of those things that I think we always wanted to know more about. And, before we get too far into like some of the other stuff, we should really point out some things about Birthright that are important even today. Like there's a really strong collection of fans at a place called Birthright.net.
Sure, yeah.
Which is where I learned that little bit about the halflings. So
they maintain it's run by a guy called Arjun, and he's been running it for decades now. he's been he's the only guy I think who's possibly a bigger Birthright nerd than I am.
And that's saying a lot.
Yeah, but he's run Birthright.net for a long time. I've been a member of that community for a long time. I worked on the fan 3rd edition conversion for Birthright that came out of that.
I want to say that site started in the 90s, didn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it was one of
the original version of it before it got its own domain.
You know, the thing about Birthright, I've run 4 different campaigns of it myself, which is a lot for any one setting. And I've played in 3 more. So 7 times I have been in long campaigns about Birthright.
Wow.
You know, the thing I think is really kind of sad about it is they did this book called the 30 Years of Adventure book for Dungeons & Dragons. I'm sure you're very familiar with this, Richard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know what's really sad about that book? Is it covers every single campaign setting ever made with one exception. The only setting left out of the 30 Years of Adventure book for D&D. They cover Mystara, they cover, everything is in there except Birthright. I'm like, what? How did this happen?
We kind of don't really know how well Birthright might have really done, because the setting had a relatively small print run, and keep in mind this decision's made by the business team at TSR, and they tried to keep as much of this stuff as far away from us creatives type as they could. They did not want us to know, what they were up to. But I want to say the print run for Birthright was only about 35,000 copies, which sounds like a lot today. But
no, it's tiny back in those days. Yeah.
Yeah, back in that time, in the 90s, at kind of the heyday of the 2nd edition, a setting like Dark Sun, I want to say sold well over 80,000 copies or something, right? I mean, so it had a short print run.
Dark Sun, Birthright, and Ravenloft all came out within a year, didn't they?
No, Ravenloft I think was a little bit older than that, but
the original adventure, I meant the setting, the campaign setting.
No, I think the campaign setting was already fairly well established. I started at TSR in October 91, and I think the Ravenloft setting was already well established by that point.
I would take Richard's word for it, Darryl.
Yeah. But anyway, long and short of it is, they had a relatively short print run, and it sold out, and they never reprinted it because it turned out that all the stuff they put in the box made that box very, very expensive. To the point where if they had a bit of a better business team, they might have realized that they ought not to have put everything in the box that they did, because they had a real hard time making money on it.
And there was also that kind of strange marketing approach with it, where they were supporting the setting with all these tiny little booklets that were kind of mass produced. I mean, they flooded the market with them, here's one for Endir, here's one for, not that these were terrible, but I mean, there were just so many of them and so quickly, and then, they just weren't very, there wasn't a lot of meat to them. You know what I mean?
No, once again, it was just a crazy strategy that, none of us creative types were, it wasn't our idea, right? We literally just got handed this with literally just, just months to go before the setting's going to come out, where, hey, new plan, we're actually going to produce 4 products at a time, and we're going to do it, 4 times a year. And so we need to come up with the first batch of things that's going to come out, bang, 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 bang,
One of the first source books was, of course, Blood Enemies, and that was covering the big bads, which are the Onshalian, and we'll get into them in a second. But this was their big villain book, and it was kind of being, my understanding is, from Colin and Ed, is this book was basically being developed at the same time as the box set. You kind of gave the ideas to Lizard, and he just kind of went off on his own.
Yeah.
So, crazy.
I really kind of wish that, I was like, ooh, we did not... We didn't get this right. This is not, the same world that we're talking about over here. And trying to square that circle was quite a job.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. It's a strange story to think how they handled the setting, how much different things could have gone, how well it could have maybe possibly have done for the company, if it had been given a different shake like the other settings did.
And, another funny thing about it was we had naturally assumed that we wanted to launch a book line of some sort, a fiction to go along with it. And every time that I kind of went and talked to the book department people about the setting, for months and months coming up, it's like, hey, here's a setting. I've been begging you guys for a chance to write a novel. I know this world better than anybody. Let me take a shot at writing a novel here, and let me show you what I can do. And I was told, time after time, no, we're not actually going to publish novels for this. We're not going to do it, so don't worry about it. And then, of course, literally like 4 months before the box set was going to come out, upper management had a change of heart and said, "Hey, tell me about the novels we're doing for this." And the book team's like, "Yeah, I guess we're novel immediately. Who do we know that can write this thing, as fast as possible?" I pointed out that I knew the world better than anybody, but of course, having not written a novel for them at that point, they just said, "You might be great, you might not, we don't know, but it's not fair to you to say your first shot at getting a novel with us is to do this thing that's going to be this huge rush project right away. We'll get you a chance later, but we got to go with a pro for the first book." And they brought this guy in and actually flew him out to Wisconsin and had a chance to meet with the guy. And the first thing he said as he was kind of looking at the material, he's like, "Okay, so I looked over what you sent me, and here's what's going to happen. Instead of being the guy who dies that the Empire ends that you've got here, instead that's going to be the guy who builds the Empire. So he's going to be the guy who puts it all together and starts the Empire, and everything's groovy now."
Wow.
And we were just flabbergasted. We're like, "You don't understand. The entire setting doesn't work if you do that. You cannot do that." I kind of sat back and
the guy on this podcast who does not understand the setting is sitting here face palming at that notion.
My initial reaction was, of course, to turn the table over. I resisted. I thought about it carefully. And
Good for you.
What I had to do is I had to kind of pull a little bit of judo on this guy. I had to kind of use his strength against him. So I managed to say, instead of saying, no, you can't do that, realizing in an amazing flash of insight for someone of my age at that time, that's probably not going to work. So instead, I managed to divert him and say, "How about this? He still needs to be the guy that the Empire ends with because that's pretty integral to the setting. But what it really is, if he doesn't do exactly what he does, if he doesn't die in this heroic way and make this heroic sacrifice, it would have been 10 times worse."
We got a lot more awesome stuff to talk about with Birthright, but for now, we're just going to take a quick break to let everybody get another drink from the bar, and we'll be back in a few.
Did you think the Spirit Store was only open during Halloween? Well, I've got some news for you. The perfect place for that hard-to-find accessory for your newest cosplay, unique home decor for your LARP, that awesome prop for your D&D game, they've got it all. Whether you're on a budget or you're looking for the highest quality product you can find, Spirit has what you need. Just go to the show notes or to gamerstavern.org and click on the affiliate link to support the show and find that perfect item now.
And we're back with Rich Baker and Darryl Mott Jr., and we're talking about Birthright. The only thing I would just call back really quick is to say I think I know who you're talking about, Rich, because I have read all the novels, but we don't need to go any further into that, just to say, if you've read the novels, you may know who he's talking about. So, Darryl, we've been kind of telling you about what Birthright is like and what it's about. What other questions would you ask, since you're the guy who, wants to know more about the setting?
Yeah, ironically enough, I'm playing the Watson in this episode. But there's one thing that I was kind of curious about. We've talked a lot about the humans in this world, and I mentioned halflings, but what about, there's elves and dwarves in this too, and I know there's something interesting about them. And what are the other races like around here? Where are they hiding out with all the humans who are having their power struggle, political stuff?
The elves are actually, they were the original inhabitants of this continent called Cyrilia, and they have essentially seen their homeland invaded and taken over by humans. So they've really been kind of pushed back from a lot of their ancient homelands, and they're not really nice guys. The strongest influence for the elves of Birthright, frankly, is kind of the more Irish myths of the Sidhe. So that,
oh yeah,
in fact, one of the little nuggets in the setting is the idea of this thing called the Gilly Sidhe, the hunt of the elves.
The hunt of the elves.
And the humans tell stories about how back in the days when humans were savages still in the woods,
hunt.
The elves would ride out and hunt them down. So that there's this long history of strife between humans and elves. And the elves generally don't have much nice to say or do with humans, and try to keep them out of their lands as much as possible.
Well, there's a big thing about elves. I mean, frankly, Birthright elves are my favorite elves because they have this really cool, rich history. And one of the things about them is, remember we talked about that big battle between all the gods and the evil god back in the day? Well, the evil god had kind of gone to the elves and said, you guys got a raw deal. Let me help you out. So during the final battle against Sauron, the elves were on his side. And it was kind of a dramatic last minute switch of loyalty on the part of the elves that actually carried the day for the forces of light. So the elves are kind of like everybody, this is a thing that is still remembered, by the elves themselves because they're really long lived, but it's also remembered down through the ages by all the humans too. So they're very mistrustful of the elves, not only because the elves don't like humans in general, but also because they literally were on the side of evil during the huge fight until the last minute.
So kind of like Vichy France and the French resistance sort of thing? Maybe?
Well, that's an interesting parallel to make.
Overtones of that, maybe?
Maybe. But just like, I've always loved that alien feel to them. Like they're not really, like in a lot of other D&D realms, elves just kind of live amongst the other peoples. They're kind of part of the world. They're not really, away from it so much. Although in Forgotten Realms, they do this a little bit with Evermeet. But in Birthright, it's very much that whole, like, in the elven lands, things are different.
So it's more Tolkien-esque.
Yeah.
Real sense of apartness. Yeah.
Agreed. And one thing I think is really interesting about elves, that, Rich and Colin put into it was, now this is back in 2nd edition, but they said that, there was no divine connection with the elves because, first of all, they were still there when the old gods died and the new gods were risen up, and all the new gods are human. So the elves are like, I'm not going to worship that guy. I've seen him tie his shoes, So there's no such things as elven clerics, paladins, etc., because all the gods are human and they don't worship humans. And that's an interesting idea. I think I liked one of the things that 3rd edition D&D came out with, which was this idea that, you could actually gain divine power from paradigms and ideals rather than like a specific deity. I'm going to throw something in Rich's way here. I'm just going to say, I think, for me, one of the things when I read that, I instantly thought, flashed back to the idea of the Shaleen, the elves in Birthright. And I thought, that would be a really good way to explain how you could play an elven priest or an elven paladin or an elven druid and just say that they are all, gaining their power from the ideal of nature or from, a particular, paradigm.
Nice. In 4th edition terms, I think it'd be interesting to just say elves don't make use of the divine power source, right? To them, it's dead to them, right? They don't have souls or something. And instead, when they need to do kind of divine-y sort of things, they're probably actually using like what 4th edition called the primal power source, right? Literally the power of nature. We did a little bit of that in the 4th edition Dark Sun setting, right? That 4th edition
Right.
Dark Sun, the gods are missing or they're absent from that setting. So we said in 4e, hey, there's no divine power source in Dark Sun. The people who heal you are probably people who have some amount of psionics that do similar things, or the primal power source, because were druids in Dark Sun, and similar sort of thing. Different editions of the game would give you different technology, different bits of game tech you could apply to sort of simulate different aspects of the world.
Well, I had a friend of mine who just adored the concept of the Shaleen and what they were going through with their world being invaded like this. And, he wanted to create a character who was essentially an elven paladin, but his explanation for, his divine powers was that he was a paladin of the elven renaissance. Like, that was his ideal. And that was the thing that gave him power. And like, because we were building on that whole idea of, your bloodline gives you some divine connection, right? Because he is a blooded elf. Why not? It seemed like a really sweet idea. And he ended up forming a whole, this is just a player, I love to tell character stories that are of good, interesting players. But this guy, he built like a whole movement called the Thena-She, which was, we are going to leave Cerelia and find our own world because we can't, what we had here is gone. And it's
I immediately thought Renell.
It's pointless to try and fight it, was his idea. He's like, Rove Manslayer is one of the elves that is like, oh hell no, we are taking our land back. And, my friend wanted to play like influential character like Rove, but he didn't want he wanted a more heroic viewpoint.
Sure, that's interesting. Yeah, because there definitely are there are some of the Elven kingdoms are very reclusive, and there's others that do kind of argue for a little more engagement with humans, and others that probably would pull the I'm out of here switch if they could. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of really interesting connotations there to explore.
I got to tell you, one thing about the elves in Birthright is like all their names of their realms and their guys, and like even the suggested character names, they're all basically Welsh, right? What that means is they're incredibly hard. I mean, and they're great. They're great, but they're really hard to pronounce and they're even harder to spell on a character sheet.
Okay, smoke a pack a day and drink at least a fifth of bourbon a day, and you can pull off Welsh.
All I'll say is I've been involved in 7 Birthright campaigns, so I've seen an awful lot of elf characters and played some myself. And it's always been a challenge. I'll be like, somebody will ask me, well, how do you pronounce this? And I've researched this, so I would say, well, here's what I think it is. And they say, great, how do I spell that? Just, here's the sheet. Just copy it. I'm not going to even bother with that.
You guys get that layer of phlegm at the back of your throat to be able to pull off.
It was very
Welsh.
characterful. I want to say I thought it was very, very characterful, but I thought you kind of appreciate the flip side of that as well.
Sorry, I hope our English fans appreciate those cracks that I just made against the Welsh. I have no problems with the Welsh.
The actual Welsh. I have no problems with actual Welsh people at all. You guys are awesome.
You guys allowed Doctor Who to shoot there in Cardiff. You guys are awesome.
Big shout out to any Welsh listeners, absolutely.
I think we have 3 or 4.
Yeah, it's certainly something we did in terms of, I mentioned before, the idea that the various humans are strongly based on historic cultures, and even that goes to a little bit of the naming conventions, too. The way the names of the kingdoms look, the way the names of the characters look. So, yeah, the place that we kind of refer to as like the Hanseatic League Germany, the place names look kind of German, and the character names look kind of German. And in the case of the elves, we picked something that was very Gaelic, something that was definitely at the deep end of of what the Irish and Welsh place names and character names would look like, and that does give us some real tongue twisters sometime.
I'll say this: I've been a fan of this setting for 30 years, and I just had a little test with Richard, and I managed to get about 8 out of 10. So correct. Anyway, elves are not the only race though in Birthright. We have dwarves, you have halflings, half-elves. Surprisingly, no gnomes in Birthright.
And we will be addressing gnomes in a future episode of the podcast under wrongly maligned races, classes.
Is there?
Vampire
I just wondered if
clan,
Rich had any insight into there's no gnomes.
For the life of me, I cannot remember why we decided to exclude them, other than just to make a statement and be a little different.
Well, it certainly is that.
Yeah,
I think
maybe nomophobia was kind of new and shiny. We wanted to kind of explore it a bit, and now it seems a little bit hackneyed and stale. And if you throw gnomes out of a setting, everyone's kind of like, well, okay, sure, everyone does that. But I say that actually having just thrown gnomes out of the Primeval Thule setting. So hey, what can I say? I guess I just don't like them.
It's not the first time Richard has thrown gnomes out of a setting. Just say that.
Mm-hmm.
Might not be the last.
I really like because I read a little bit about, again, I hit the Wikipedias and I hit Birthright.net, and your take on dwarves was really, really kind of interesting and cool.
All of the races in Birthright are basically like the classics, but they're turned up to 11, and each one is given a slightly unique twist. So Cerulean dwarves, Birthright dwarves, are even more rock-like, than a regular dwarf. Even more endurable, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're like 4, 6, and 300 pounds or something.
Yeah, because they're dense like stone.
Probably don't swim terribly well, I imagine.
No, not at all.
Yeah, that's they have the 3rd edition stats on the Birthright.net, and it's something like they get damage resistance because their skin's so thick and dense and hard.
Yeah.
But they sink like a rock. They get minuses to any sort of swim or tumble or anything like that.
I've had a Birthright GM actually use that as a thing. Like if we were ever, dealing with dwarves, one of the things was they were always like, you have to swear lots and lots of oaths that, you'll never divert a river into one of our tunnels, kind of a thing. Because that would be really bad for them,
Okay, we need to make sure this boat doesn't leave. Dwarf, where's the dwarf? Let's tie a rope to him.
And like the halflings have a really interesting connection to the shadow world, so they can they can sort of teleport by going there briefly, and they can see like evil magic and things like that. So every race had something really cool that was unique and different, and made it just a slight twist on what you would expect to find.
Yep, that's pretty much what we were trying to do was to give people who had a set of expectations about what they would think those races would do, and just try to meet them in new ways, I guess.
And even this extended to the humans. I think this was one of the very first times I'd ever seen different stats for humans based on what part of the world they came from.
Yep. Yeah.
Their home culture.
Because the different parts of the continent were so different culturally and had very different traditions of magic, different traditions of what heroes were like in that part of the world. We really wanted people to pay attention to what the nationality was of their character. To the point where you wouldn't want people to, for example, make up a Kanasi wizard and then have him run a kingdom in Vosgard. Really, it wouldn't be faithful to the setting. We wanted to encourage people to make up characters that would fit Vosgard and do Vosgard things with them.
Right.
So the Voss character race, had its own particular. It was basically human. It just had a very slight modification or two to say that these are the things that this culture will like and value, and these are the things that they would not like or value. And hopefully have that be reflected in the sorts of characters people would want to make up with those rules and bring to the table.
And you just said something that kind of kicked something in my brain. You said the word wizard, and I remember something about magic, because you said this is a low magic setting in general terms, but I seem to recall the way it's handled is probably one of the best I've seen for someone trying to do a low magic setting in a D&D system, where there's low magic and high magic, and low magic's anyone can learn that, but high magic you have to have the right bloodline or something like that.
Yeah. We essentially created a character class called the Magician, which was the character that anyone who wanted to be somebody who used magic could be. But you were not going to be able to use some of the spells that just required more magical energy. You had to work with very small amounts of magical energy and make small, subtle changes that would do that would have their effect, not principally by applying a ginormous amount of energy to something, but mostly by working on the mind, for example. So illusion or enchantment were things that the magician could do pretty well, but casting a meteor swarm, not at all what that guy could do. He just does not have the connection to the very fabric of magic that you would need to just wield that much pure energy. However,
petty tricksters, we called them.
What was that? Tricksters?
It's petty tricksters, we called them. Because if you had a bloodline, you could master high magic.
Right.
And that, my friends, is some serious.
And low magic was kind of like the equivalent of an illusionist, right?
Yeah, very, very close. Also, elves being innately magical. If you were an elf, you could use high magic.
Now, high magic is where everything was at. I mean, not only did you get all the player's handbook spells, but you also got access to some stuff that was unique to Birthright, which was spells that could affect an entire force on the battlefield, or even spells that could affect your entire kingdom.
Yep, the realm magic.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is like, you do feel like a petty trickster when the guy next to you can be like, you know what? Everybody in the kingdom is now under the effect of my spell.
It's like, oh, hey, look, I lit up my staff. Whoop-de-doo. And then you do that thing that Sauron does when he implodes at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, where just the entire army falls flat.
A properly prepared wizard with realm magic can literally summon an apocalyptic storm to destroy a castle. It's pretty amazing.
Fall, everyone dies is not as much fun when it's the players doing it.
Not just destroy a castle, right? But for example, lay waste an entire province, right? An area 50 miles across. And probably by thousands upon thousands of people. For example, like in the Disney movie Frozen, right? When you have that, the whole kingdom is frozen by Elsa, right? That you would, that's the sort of thing a realm magic might be able to do, is actually like, hey, for the next 6 months, it's winter. and it's no 10 feet deep, and people probably won't make it. Right?
Do you want to build the bloodline?
I was waiting to see how the song was stuck in my head. I love that song so much, Let It Go. And I knew he would do something to push it out of my head and ruin it. So thank you for that, Ross. It's out of my head now.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. So yeah, Realm Magic is awesome. Priests and wizards could both do it, even druids. Battle Magic was a lot of fun because in Birthright it did have a system for mass battles, and you could essentially be a wizard on the battlefield and not just be limited to, say, magic missile. You could say, I'm going to cast Storm of Magic Missiles and hit everybody in that 50-man knight unit with the magic missile at once.
Yeah,
that kind of
wizard
stuff.
Was definitely a walking piece of artillery, right? I mean, he could.
So high magic was serious shit. Yeah, and
all of this was kind of built around the idea of trying to reestablish that empire.
Well, the thing about
right, for the humans at least.
Just going back really quick to wizards, they did a really cool thing about this in the setting as well. All of the guys who could use high magic, right? That was a pretty low number of people total. You could basically say, like, I think they actually established there was like a dozen dragons in the entire world. And it was not crazy to say, there's only a few dozen actual high magic wizards in the entire world. So you felt super special. When you were capable of high magic, you were not just some guy. You were, a serious force to be reckoned with. And every single wizard in the setting has a particular title. Like, you're not just Robilar, right? You are the Sword Mage, or you are the Eyeless One, or some things like that. They all have this, like, really cool title that makes them slightly larger than life.
Yeah.
And, so you have just
trying to remind myself of what some of the wizard names were, and it's been a little while. I do remember the Sword Mage, though, the guy that ran around the barony of Gore and was a big problem.
Finnegan Truesight over in Brector/Canasi. Yeah, there's all kinds of really interesting, powerful characters. And the thing about this is also, Birthright was a relatively low-level setting. Most of the rulers of the kingdoms were actually less than 10th level.
Part of that was the edition, right? Because second edition was...
Right.
Yeah, it was just worked so much better in that range of like level 4 to 7 or so that you didn't really want to encourage people to play too far outside the band. Had we done that same setting in the 3E era, I think we would have probably scattered those ruler levels much more broadly up into the teens.
Well, I just think it's interesting. Like, you can look at the spread of just say Anweir, and the number of people with a level higher than 15 is extremely low.
Yeah.
And I liked the idea that you could have a range in Birthright where if you wanted to have a relatively low level group of heroes assume rulership, it felt like you could. I mean, it just felt like you as the designer were telling us that it didn't matter what level you were, you could be a king.
Well, yeah, that was actually quite deliberate on our part. We wanted to make sure that you could have a plausible first level party of monarchs. That was the cachet of the setting, right? This is the world where your character is a king. Well, if we say this is a world where you can play for 5 months or 6 months and then maybe, become a king, that perhaps might have been more logical in some ways, but we decided to kind of push the boundaries towards, no, sometimes you're just going to, wake up one day and find out you're in charge because, you're a young man who's never really been in charge of anything, but your dad just bought it. So,
and that's an interesting tale to tell, I think.
Yeah.
There's great tropes and stories you can do with that. And, the big deal, of course, is the struggle for the Iron Throne in Anweir. The idea that someday there will be another emperor. We touched on this. And
what did Colin say he thought?
Yeah, there's...
Who did he say was going to take over?
Rich mentioned that there's like half a dozen contenders in Anweir. There's Prince Yvonne, who is sort of like the good guy. Then there's Archduke Eric Barone, who is far more pragmatic, I would say.
Machiavellian,
but not
maybe?
Evil. No, he's just pragmatic. There's the Iron Duke of Gore, and that guy is evil. And there's the Moor of Moriad, who is basically far too busy defending the realm from the big bad, which is the Gorgon. He's far too busy holding off huge waves of monsters from invading from the north to like even be worried about it. But some people are like, that guy would be a good emperor.
Tell me what Colin said first.
Well, I asked Colin. I asked Colin specifically in my interview with on Rogue Warden. I said, between Yvonne and Barone, who do you think would win? And Colin, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, right? It is Barone, right?
I usually said Baroon, but
sorry.
That's actually the cases of a place where the pronunciation is very inconsistent.
Okay,
it's just a matter of what kind of looks cool.
I would have gone for an Italian Barone.
Yeah.
Well, Baroon. Colin suggested that Baroon, simply because he is so pragmatic and willing to play a real politic, had the edge.
My sense was, and this is just, the subtle differences of what the designers are kind of quietly thinking to themselves as they're working on the setting. I kind of regarded both Avenil and Baroon as not terribly good guys. That, the guy that I saw, as perhaps actually having the best claim on the throne, if not the most power to make a coalition to seize the throne, was actually the Moor of Moriad.
Right.
I actually at one point explored a bit of a genealogy for that part of the world, and in that genealogy, the Moriad family has a blood tie to the ruling line of Van Weer from kind of way back in the day. And probably because of that blood tie, actually has a better claim on the Iron Throne than either the two countries that are kind of best claimed to really pursue it. While he might actually technically have the best claim, that doesn't actually get him the Iron Throne when he's got Baroon and Avenil in his way.
That comes off to me as, an outsider looking in. That seems the most, story-centric way to do it. The guy who was selflessly sacrificing his political chances to protect the empire itself.
Yeah, is the one with the best claim.
Exactly. He's the guy who's actually, screw all your politicking and all your infighting crap. I've got a real war to fight to protect the empire. That's the guy I want in charge.
We always describe the Moor of Moriad and his realm, which is called Moriad. He rules from a big ass fortress called Shieldhaven. It translates as Shieldhaven. I forget what it's actually pronounced as, but Beveldroor. Yes, Beveldroor. And from Beveldroor, we always described it as the rock upon which the Gorgon shall break. Because because we always built up the Gorgon. Now, in the setting, there's a really big bad. It's like the Sauron of Birthright, is this guy called the Gorgon, who used to be the brother of the last emperor. And he has been corrupted by the bloodline of the evil god into a horrible, towering, monstrous figure called the Gorgon, who has mastered both physical combat and magic, and he rules a miniature empire of his own beyond the volcanic peaks. I mean, he is an epic bad guy. And he hungers for the Iron Throne. That's what he wants. He wants the empire for himself. So the Moor is not just like some guy on the border. He literally is holding off the tides of monsters who want to invade and tear apart everything that exists below a certain point. It's crazy epic. It's one of the best things about the setting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I confess that in some ways I always had a soft spot for Moriad, so I kind of saw them in a lot of ways. The Moor and his family as sort of the heroes of the setting and the people that I wanted to see a story get told about going forward.
Right.
And in fact, that kind of comes out that I did actually get a chance to write that novel eventually for Birthright. It was called The Falcon and the Wolf. And then after that, they liked that one well enough that they gave me a chance to write another one called The Shadowstone. TSR founded upon the hard rocks of cold and merciless business in 1996. And my first two novels that I ever wrote as a professional writer both got canceled in the same meeting.
No.
Yeah, that's a bad day at the office, let me tell you.
I believe the other novel eventually was reconfigured into a Forgotten Realms novel.
Yeah, the Shadowstone. I had an opportunity to basically take it and kind of rework it and make it into a Forgotten Realms novel, and a lot of people kind of felt that some Realms fans I think are a little bit critical of the book, a little bit unfairly because of that, but I really did do my research and set it in the part of the Realms where it fits pretty well. An enormous top to bottom rewrite to make it work in the realms. So
This is City of Ravens, if I'm correct.
no, this is the Shadowstone.
It's called the Shadowstone. Okay.
The Wolf. That's the one that's available as a free download if you can find the really obscure place where it might be hiding.
So it kept its title then.
Yes.
Okay. Super cool.
One of the interesting things about the Shadowstone is it really shows off my vision for what the Shadow world was like in Birthright. And
yes.
That wound up being a pretty interesting theme that was developed much more strongly in Forgotten Realms in the 3rd edition era, when, Troy Denning did his Return of the Archwizards from the City of Shade, series in the beginning of 3rd edition Forgotten Realms, and we, featured a lot more of this idea that, hey, there's actually potentially 2 streams of magic in the world. There's Mistra's Weave, and then there's this other source of magic for people who don't want to try to go through Mistra.
The Shadow Weave.
Yes, the Shadow Weave, right? So a lot of that stuff did actually kind of develop out of some ideas I originally was banging on for the Birthright setting, but I think was, it actually fit in the realms reasonably well, and we had a lot of fun with it for a while.
Now, speaking of novels and things, a Birthright geek like myself, you can't go without mentioning there's a Sierra game, computer game called the Gorgon's Alliance.
Yeah.
And
it's a controversial game, as I understand it.
Well, I enjoy it greatly, but it did come out quite a long time ago.
It's an RTS. It's an RTS from the mid '90s, based on Birthright. If I'm understanding correctly.
Yes, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot, but that's because I'm a Birthright nerd. It was cool to see. Like, I'd never seen how they did their how Birthright did its mass combat really until I had played Gorgon's Alliance, and I was like, oh, so that's how that's supposed to work.
All I remember about that game is it crushed me. It killed me so hard. I could never get good enough at it to have fun with it, which,
oh, wow.
As a creator of the setting,
it
kind of is a little bit of a bummer, right? It's like, oh, this game's too tough for me.
It was from Sierra Online. It was built on the Doom 2 engine, and it was basically an RTS before that was. I think it was pre-Warcraft, maybe.
It was totally turn-based. Don't take RTS as a thing, because it was really not a thing. It was a turn-based game.
Okay.
But
you're the video game guy, not me.
Trust me, I played the hell out of Gorgon's Alliance. It's turn-based. The only real-time elements are during adventures, and even then, you can pause it and just select your ability and go on. It's just like Baldur's Gate. So there's that. And then there's actually, I think this is kind of a real bummer, like a missed opportunity, I think, Rich, is there was this wonderful board game called Legacy of Kings.
Yeah, I didn't actually have much to do with that.
Right, but you're aware of it.
That was something that Ed Stark was playing around with some.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he says there was lines going around the block every time he would bring it out for Gen Con.
Yeah.
And I've always wanted to play it. And especially now that D&D is kind of doing an awful lot of board games, I kind of think, hey guys, you've got this great board game sitting around, pile of money that you're just not taking. Why aren't you taking this pile of money? Because make Legacy of Kings. Everyone I've talked to that's been involved in it says it's a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Have you played it?
15 years ago, right? I mean, I've not seen that in a long, long time. Usually when a game doesn't come out, it lives in somebody's shoebox, right?
Right.
And if you're not, living in the same state with the guy who's got the shoebox anymore, you don't see it much. So yeah, I haven't seen Legacy of Kings in a long time. I did see something really cool though at a Gen Con a few years ago where somebody had put together a big diplomacy variant on Birthright, where it essentially just took the straight up diplomacy rules, but played it on the map of Cerelia. And I want to say that the people who did it actually made like a big giant sized board that was like 6 feet by 6 feet or something. And it looked gorgeous, and it looked like it'd be a lot of fun, but I was up to my eyeballs and other stuff, and I couldn't stick around to watch or try to play.
So, now that I've got you here, I gotta kind of mention a couple things, about the line, like the Birthright line. We talked about like the little bitty source books that they did for all the individual realms. But I think that one of the strengths of the line, probably its strongest bit, was the support books that it had. The Book of Regency, the Book of Magecraft, the Book of Priestcraft.
Sure.
I think those were all high quality products. Those were excellent. And again, this is kind of where the line transitioned from you and Colin over to Ed Stark and Carrie Bebris, right?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I did have a little bit of Birthright stuff after the box set. I worked on the Book of Priestcraft a fair bit. I worked on the Kanasi book, which I think was Cities of the Sun.
Yes, Cities of the Sun, and God, I love Cities of the Sun. It's fantastic.
Thank
you. We played our most recent Birthright game set there, actually.
Yeah, weirdly enough, I had to invent a whole set of naval rules for Cities of the Sun because so much of that area is seafaring.
Right.
And they wound up pulling out those naval rules and publishing them as a separate standalone product.
Which I own.
But yeah, it was very strange to discover. Wait, I was actually working on one thing, and it turned out we made something totally different out of it. But other than that, I relatively soon after I had wrapped up my that work on Birthright, I was pulled over into beginning to do some work on the Alternity game, and so other than getting a chance to kind of I did at least one of those thin Realms source books too. I did the one on Rossonne.
Of course, the Black Barony.
Yes, yeah, but yeah, part of the downside about the schedule we had of those days was a lot of times you didn't get a chance to stay on anything really long. You would just kind of it'd be time to start working on the next product, whatever that is. TSR back in that era, the mid '90s, was routinely publishing well over 100 game source books a year across all the different product lines. There was just an immense number of things getting written by an immense number of people, really, compared to like the way Wizards of the Coast manages the D&D line over the last few years, where it's more like a dozen releases a year, not 100.
Well, I wanted to ask you a thing about one of these Realms books. Not the Realms, but the setting books, I should say. Because we talked about Cities of the Sun, we talked about Brector, and we talked about Vosgard a little bit. Then there's the Rearic Highlands. I wanted to ask you a question because I mean this like in the most respectful way because I love Birthright, but I always feel like the Rearic Highlands was kind of the weakest in the overall theme and paradigm of all the Realms books. And I understand why that is. I mean, when you have a whole bunch of books, there's always going to be one that's slightly better than the others, etc. Did you ever play Skyrim by any chance?
Just a little bit.
Well, because I played Skyrim, and let me tell you, I think that is what I think of when I think of the Rearic Highlands, because it is totally like Viking land recovering from an imperial conquest. It is totally that.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Yeah, the weird thing about it is we were trying to go with two different streams there of obviously very Viking influenced, but secondly also very Druidic influenced. And in some ways it was always a bit of an uneasy marriage. And so I feel like in some ways the Rearic area never really kind of took off quite the same way that some of the other areas did.
So, unfortunately, I think we're going to run a little long here just because I love this setting so much. We're just talking about it. I'm going to jump around a little bit on some of these bullet points that Darryl laid out for us so well. One of the things that's probably the most iconic about Birthright, besides all the setting elements we talked about, is the mechanics of its domain management system.
Okay.
Which was really a pioneer. I mean, it was a pioneer in that arena for role-playing, because role-playing, I think, before Birthright had been, for the most part, like 99%, had been about kicking in the door in the dungeon or doing things on a small, individual level. Birthright comes along and is like, no.
Back to the town, and you might have to defend the town at best.
Right.
But I got to say, I really wish Birthright was more on my radar with some of the stuff I was trying to do in some of my games in Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms, if nothing else, so I could understand those domain rules a little bit better. I've just kind of gleaned over them, but it seemed like a really, really smart way to handle managing an entire kingdom while still being able to, without going into basically becoming an accountant.
Yeah,
it did a really elegant job of abstracting a lot of that. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Exactly.
I came to that actually as a longtime wargamer. Even before I had started playing D&D as a kid, I was a big fan of the various Avalon Hill games, for example. And so I came to the part of the game where we were going to be talking about, we need to provide people interesting ways to manage their kingdom and interesting ways for kingdoms to interact with each other. And so very naturally, I kind of returned to my sort of wargaming roots and built the domain rules to essentially be, in some ways, a very light wargame. And in fact, if you're not very familiar with war games, it's maybe a little bit hard to see that in some places, but some of the ways that, for example, the war moves work when it's time to actually begin moving units around and invading people's provinces and how that sequence of play works, there's definitely places where the wargaming roots really kind of come out and shine a little more. It's funny because I went back and looked at those domain rules just a few months ago. I was playing around with an idea of a campaign to run, and I think there's definitely some things I would do to maybe try to simplify them at this point. I think one of my characteristics as a designer when I first started my career is I was very tempted to sometimes complexify things that I would now, with a little more seasoning, try to keep simpler.
Well, if you don't mind a little feedback on them, actually, I think they're great. I love them. But there are some things I wish I could do a little differently. I always wanted to see like more rules for building monuments and stuff, like in Civilization.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And I always wanted some way to have like hidden holdings, because it always felt like, if you're the king, you know there's a thieves guild in town. It didn't feel like you could ever really do the whole like, well, the king mustn't ever find out that we have the hidden temple of cultists, because
I feel kind of like a dick for bringing up another Game of Thrones reference, but you need a little finger on the small council.
You totally do. You need a little finger on the small council. So that would be a thing that I would like to see, for sure. And lastly, there's because the way that Birthright was set up as a setting, wizards drew their power from the land. And what that meant is that wizards, if they were ruling a province and stuff, they could never build that province up. They could never have civilization in a city and like thriving commerce or anything. It always had to be this remote tower in the wilderness. And, while there's nothing wrong with the remote tower in the wilderness, this is also at the same time when we had Kelvin Arunsun in his tower in the middle of Waterdeep.
Right.
Right? So I was like, that felt a little dichotomous to me. I always was like, I could see a druid where a druid's like, no. There can be nobody living here in order for me to gain power.
That's actually one of the things that I think I would do differently. I think I reflected on this maybe in a blog post or a discussion I was having. It might have actually been now I think about it, the interview I did a couple of years ago.
Right.
Where I feel that in 4th edition D&D, when we came out with the idea of the different power sources, that I realized that the primal power source for D&D 4th edition, that was kind of the thing I was trying to wrap my head around when I was thinking about those wizard sources of magic in Birthright. And I think that what I would probably do is have that nature-inspired power actually work through a druid regent in some way. And for the wizards, I think I would actually try to do something a lot more idiosyncratic, something that works totally unlike the way other character holdings works.
Like an artifact that's a holding.
Yep, that's exactly what that's what I was kicking around at the time, was the idea that a wizard might be powerful because what was
Locutus.
What was the thing that Thulsa Doom had? The ring.
A locus is probably what you're thinking of. And
a locus, a locus.
Yeah.
That might be a Shadowrun term, but
yeah,
that's the first thing that popped in my head.
Or like
Thulsa Doom had a very deep baritone voice.
Well, there's because there's certainly a zillion examples of that sort of thing around in fiction. I'm thinking of things like the very kind of creepy and disturbing book from The Face in the Frost, or heck, the Necronomicon from Army of Darkness, right?
The Ring,
or the Magic Mirror from Maleficent.
One Ring.
Yeah, the Magic Mirror. That's actually an excellent example, right, of a great way that you would like to be able to say this is something you have to keep somewhere, and you want to have it safeguarded. So that's why you have a tower, not measured in armies and territory. I mean, unless you choose to actually have those things under your dominion. But if you don't, you're still, a power that needs to be considered when anybody around you makes a move. And I think that's kind of cool.
Darryl suggested the One Ring.
Yeah, a very good example.
Sauron poured all his power into the One Ring to bring all the realms under his control. They rebelled, blah, 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 but that ring was his power. And that's kind of...
Yeah, absolutely.
That seems like the quintessential example of what you're kind of describing here.
Yeah.
In a way. And correct me if I'm wrong, please.
It sounds right to me.
I think that's a pretty fair synopsis, right? I mean, the One Ring, obviously. I would almost say that the combination of like Barad-dûr and the One Ring, right? Because Saruman was also really kind of anchored to the darn tower. He didn't get up and walk around for that very much once he settled in.
Yeah.
And, again, we're feeling a bit of the time crunch, so I'm going to jump around a little bit. But I wanted to, now that I've kind of given you some criticisms, I want to talk about some of the things I think are just like the wonderful bits about Birthright.
Well, there's kind of something I kind of wanted to know about. I'm mostly sold on Birthright as someone who didn't grow up playing it. So I'm kind of wondering, we know about the political stuff. We know about the divine right to rule being an actual game mechanic in the game. What else really sets this apart and makes it feel unique from other campaign settings that might be similar in tone?
Yeah, well, that's where I'm going with that, exactly.
Ross hasn't mentioned yet, really, was the idea of the Anshalan.
Yes.
Right.
The big bad guys.
The monsters are unique. That they're, he mentioned the idea of the Gorgon, but there are many monstrous creatures that receive that divine infusion of power from this long ago battle, just like there were humans and other heroic characters. And those monstrous characters, many of them went and founded realms of their own. Now, they tend to be smaller and obviously way more hostile than the realms founded by humans. Within its own realm, a monster had every bit as much power as a mighty human king. And so therefore, it was no simple matter of saying, well, there's this guy, the Gorgon, he's a big problem. Let's just get the best 500 knights we can find and go in there and kill him. Yeah, no, he's got armies, he's tough. Even the ones that didn't necessarily have a whole lot of armies, just within their own domain. And there were characters like, the Serpent, the Banshee, the Hag.
The Basilisk.
The Basilisk, you're right. The Chimera, right? That there were many of these kind of really mythical creatures were things that had once been human and now were almost godlike in their power and their evil and presented a real serious threat to the people trying to run the kingdoms that happened to border those lands.
And they were just an epic. They felt epic, right? They felt like these were legendary beasts that you could defeat. If you were heroes that could take out the Basilisk, not just a Basilisk, the Basilisk, you were amazing. And there's something about that scale, too, the sheer scale of the setting, where you can think about the stakes and how high they are. Like, you can look at a map and see 4 or 5 provinces that are nothing but a poisoned waste labeled the Basilisk. And you're like, oh, shit.
Yep. I felt that, once again, that was something that people seem to really enjoy as far as a distinctive characteristic of the setting. Various human nationalities, the domain rules, the bloodlines for the characters. I feel a little guilty about the bloodlines now. Once again, with a little more seasoning as a designer, I feel like the bloodline powers were kind of like cracked for PCs, right? I mean, a lot of people really liked playing with getting these crazy, powerful good abilities just from being born to these different bloodlines. I don't know if the setting really needed that system in retrospect, but it sure did make people feel good about rolling up their characters.
Without, I am an enormous fan of the setting, and I love everything about it. But at the same time, I see where you're coming from. I think just the right to rule alone would have probably been enough.
Yeah.
Not the superpowers that came with that.
Yep, exactly. Right. That's that simplicity versus complexity thing I was mentioning a little while ago. Right. It just it could have done the same job with a little bit less if you follow my thinking there.
Well, one thing I thought was really great about this as well, when you look at again, a big deal of Birthright is the maps. You look at the map, you can see where all the lines are drawn and kind of get an idea of not only the things that are threatening you and the things that were, the places you can go, the agency nodes, as we like to say, where you can change things in the world. But you guys did a really good job of actually including a lot of intentional white space, a lot of places that were unclaimed. And you as a ruler were always like, yeah, I don't have to fight an army in there, baby. I just have to go plant my flag.
Yep.
One of the many times Birthrights come up in this is when we specifically talked about white space.
Right.
And Ross was very, very clear that he was impressed by there are these kingdoms that no source book is ever going to say, hey, this place is claimed, and this place is claimed, and this place is claimed. It's no. Your player characters can go here and play.
Specifically the Five Peaks in Anweer, the Giant Downs in the Rearic Highlands. In fact, this may have been a boo-boo, but there's actually an unclaimed province right next to Diomed in Anweer. It doesn't even have a name. It's just like a completely unnamed empty province, and we were always like, ooh, I wonder what's there.
Huh, weird.
Naming that province was actually a really fun thing to do. We were like, I went directly for that province just so I would have the privilege of naming it whatever I wanted it to name it. I think it might have been a boo-boo on the map, but yeah, if you look, it's there. It's right on the edge of the Five Peaks. There's a completely unnamed province. So yeah, the white space was great. The epic feel. Let's talk a little bit about the visuals. Birthright was defined by the artwork of Tony Sudlow, and I think I'm pronouncing that right. Sudlow.
Yep.
It's spelled Sczudlo.
Yep.
And just like Tony DiTerlizzi did for the Planescape setting, or Jeff Easley did for the early Forgotten Realms, Tony Sudlow's artwork is really the keystone that draws you in visually and connects everything together and makes you feel like this is a living, breathing world.
Yeah, Tony was a great guy to work with. I was always, welcome to drop on down to the artist bullpen and stop in and chat with him about the setting and what we were trying to do with it. He had a lot of fun with the big battle scene painting that forms the cover of the box set. The cover of the box set is actually only a portion of that painting. It goes and wraps quite a bit on either side. Of all things, I think there might be a mouse pad that shows a lot more of that painting than what was on the box set cover. But it was like if you ever like when you're a kid, if you ever like draw stick figures and have like little army men battles on your notebook paper of like, oh, this guy shoots this guy, you draw a little dotted line, and the guy's falling over, and Tony was kind of doing that with his artwork. He was like, yeah, this guy's stabbing this dude with a lance, but he's got this other guy coming up behind him who's about to hit him with that big pointy thing, and yeah, so he was totally goofing on that, and
you can find his DeviantArt page actually and order prints of some of the unpublished Birthright pieces, like the Raven. I actually own a copy of that.
Oh, cool.
So you should, any fans of Birthright should totally look him up on DeviantArt. We'll have a link in the show notes.
Like I said, going into this, I knew everything I knew about Birthright I learned from Ross. I've done a little bit of research before we recorded, but you guys have completely sold me. I did want to point out one thing. The Birthright campaign setting for 2nd edition is currently available on D&D Classics, and we will have a link in the show notes to this, as a PDF for $9.99.
Wow.
So you can get the PDF of, I assume it's everything that was in the original box set. I'm not entirely sure yet, because I haven't purchased my copy yet, because we're in the middle of recording, and I don't want to slow down the Skype with my download. But, yeah, I'm freaking sold. Other than going to that PDF, what would you guys suggest would be the best way to kind of get into Birthright as a campaign setting?
I felt that the Birthright.net guys with their 3rd edition conversion of the setting did a pretty good job. So, I mean, and that's one I bet you could probably get your hands on a lot easier than, I mean, I'm sure there's old 2nd edition Birthright sets that are around on eBay and stuff, and you probably pay an arm and a leg for them. And the 3rd edition set obviously is a...
eBay and Amazon are actually very, very reasonably priced. It's very rarely much more than a couple of bucks more than the cover price.
Wow, okay.
Well, if you like Birthright and maybe you want something a little more, if you like the idea of it anyway, and you maybe want something a little more modern, Rob Schwab's Song of Ice and Fire roleplay has a lot of similar themes.
Sure, yeah.
And there's ability to create your house, and again, it's Game of Thrones, so it's very similar politically in some of the things you can do. And there is a
Green Ronin has a version of Game of Thrones that's licensed to the TV series rather than the books, I believe. They actually just today released a free download, which was the Book of Hodor. How to Hodor by Hodor.
Hodor. Because today is April Fool's Day when we're recording.
Nice.
when we're recording this, yes, I will have a link in the show notes because I think it's one of the most brilliant April Fool's products I have seen since the Shadowrun one back when FanPro was in charge, and they gave you the option to play Great Dragon PCs.
So the other one I would suggest is similar thematically is the Kingmaker Adventure Path for Pathfinder.
Oh yeah. Actually, I know the guys at Paizo really well, and the Kingmaker Adventure Path was they definitely ripped a lot on Birthright. Was they were putting that together? They were fanboys too on that.
Awesome. It has to be great for you, Rich. 30 years later to find all these people who just love the setting so much.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not 30 years, but 20 years.
20, but that's okay. Not quite that old.
I did want to ask you something while I've got you on the line, Mr. Baker. I have asked Margaret Weiss this about Dragonlance. I have asked Keith Baker about this about Eberron. Have you been in touch with Wizards of the Coast lately? Because they have been making a big push to bring back original creators. They've got Ed Greenwood on board already. Margaret Weiss has said she's apparently, Wizards has been talking to Keith Baker for Eberron stuff. Has Wizards been in contact with you for Birthright by any chance, trying to tie into the pre-post Game of Thrones push that a lot of this political fantasy has?
Short answer is no. I haven't talked about Birthright stuff with the Wizards guys in quite a long time.
It's the forgotten setting.
Relations with Wizards, and in fact, I've done some work for them relatively recently.
I think, and this is kind of a bummer, but I don't think Wizards really even ever remembers that they own it, honestly.
I believe that's true.
I will take everything in my power to start kicking people because I am completely sold on Birthright. I want to play Birthright. Hey, Ross, do you want to run Birthright for me on Skype? I'll get people together.
I would I think it would be a lot of fun to do. And it's kind of, that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show is because I just don't think, I don't think people are aware of it. I don't even think the company that owns it remembers that they have it. And it's kind of a bummer because it's such a great setting. And this would be a great time to bring it back because of Game of Thrones.
Perfect for the time. Exactly.
Yeah.
My final thoughts on it is it was incredibly inspiring to me in my career. I think it needs to be remembered because it was a pioneer in several areas. And the art of domain management as a thing in RPGs is really, core to that as something that, as a game designer, I find just very enticing to me. It's a missed opportunity that we haven't really seen too many more domain management games since then. Someday I'd like to do a Kickstarter to maybe rescue Birthright as some inspired by, they did the Dragon Kings, which was inspired by Dark Sun, and it's basically Dark Sun. Maybe someday we'll do, Bloodright, and, it's Birthright. That would be a cool Kickstarter to run. That's all I'm saying.
It's crossed my mind once or twice as far as what I could do in that direction. It's, but it's something that's easier done, with Wizards rather than against them, I think.
I understand. But sometimes, you gotta go, like Dragon Kings, sometimes you just gotta, do your thing. There you go.
I got some friends over at Wizards. I'll start kicking them. We'll see what happens.
Richard, what are your final thoughts on Birthright as we go to last call?
It's something that I look back on, and it's the nature of a creative job that you always look back at and think, maybe I could have done this a little bit different or that a little bit different, but by and large, I'm really proud of it, right? It's something that I did pretty early in my career, and it, a lot of it just hung together and worked very, very well, and in a lot of ways, I think probably about the best world that I've built, at least up until the one I built just last year. So
Primeval Thule.
It's very flattering that so many people have gotten so much fun out of playing in my world. It's a strange thing, but boy, it is flattering at the end of the day.
Darryl, do you have any final thoughts?
Like I said, I am completely sold. I don't know much about the setting, but everything, hearing you guys talk about all the stuff going on, answering my questions, I want to play, damn it.
It was
you doing anything after the recording, Ross?
It was the More of Moria that sold you. I know. As soon as we talked about him, you were like, yeah, I'm in. Right? Am I right?
The Jon Snow of Birthright.
Yes.
Oh, I did it again.
No,
didn't
he's
I?
totally the Jon Snow of Birthright. And that's the thing, is you can draw those parallels. But yeah, we need to, last call, the Imperial soldiers are going to throw us out of the tavern if we don't wrap it up. So, Rich, do us a favor. Tell the listeners what your latest thing is and where they can find you on the interwebs.
Sure. If you're curious on what I'm up to these days, the most current thing would be the Primeval Thule campaign setting, which is a Conan versus Cthulhu-esque sword and sorcery fantasy world. And that is being offered through my little company, Sasquatch Game Studio, LLC. And the place you can kind of come to find out more about that would be all one word, SasquatchGamestudio.com.
And you have a blog that has an awesome name. I'm jealous of the name of your blog.
Yes, I do blog a little bit infrequently, but I try to do better at it at Atomic Dragon Battleship.
What a great name. All right. And we ran long in this show, but
that
would have been
that would have so been the name of this podcast.
Atomic Dragon Battleship. That would be a good subtitle. But we did, of course, run long because this is, definitely something right up my alley. And I, on behalf of Darryl and myself, and of course, probably everyone at Birthright.net, who I always shout out to if I can, we're deeply grateful to you, Mr. Baker, for coming on and giving us your thoughts.
Hey, it was
Thank
my
you
pleasure.
very much for coming on.
We'd love to have you back on the show, of course, anytime to talk about anything regarding Dungeons & Dragons, Forgotten Realms, Primeval Thule, pretty much anything you want to talk about. You have an open ticket to come back on and chat with us.
I kind of would like to talk to you about alternative.
Oh, yeah, that would be a good one to bring back.
Yeah, I would be happy to sometime.
And until then, we're going to say goodbye, and may all your hits be crits. 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 Be crits.